Homeless mom cries after Neymar's gift saves her family. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The streets were colder than ever. Maria clutched her baby tightly against her chest, trying to shield him from the biting wind. Her older daughter, Sophia, shivered beside her, curling into her mother's side for warmth. It had been weeks since they had a proper roof over their heads, and Maria was running out of hope. She had once had a small apartment, a steady job at a bakery, and dreams for her children's future. But life had been cruel. When her husband passed away unexpectedly, she was left with nothing. The rent piled up, and despite working long hours, she couldn't keep up. Eventually, she and her children were evicted, forced onto the streets with nowhere to go. Maria had knocked on every shelter's door, but they were all full. Every night, she wrapped her children in whatever blankets she could find, hoping they would make it through to the morning. Hunger gnawed at her constantly, but she gave whatever little food she could find to her children first. She had always promised them she would protect them, but now, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep that promise. Then, on one fateful afternoon, everything changed. Maria was sitting outside a supermarket, watching as people walked in and out, carrying bags full of food. She wasn't begging. She had too much pride for that, but she couldn't stop the hollow ache in her stomach as she saw the abundance of food just out of reach. She was about to stand up and leave when she noticed a commotion. A crowd had gathered at the entrance, whispering excitedly. She turned her head, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Neymar, the Brazilian football superstar, dressed casually but unmistakable, was walking towards the store, surrounded by a few security guards. Maria had seen him play on television back when she had a home, back when her life had been normal. She never imagined she would see him in person, let alone in a moment like this. Sophia tugged on Maria's sleeve. "Mom, isn't that Neymar?" she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Maria forced a small smile. "Yes, sweetheart," but she didn't expect what happened next. As Neymar approached the entrance, he paused. His sharp eyes had caught sight of Maria and her children huddled against the wall. He turned to one of his security guards and said something in a low voice. Then, to Maria's absolute shock, he walked straight toward them. Maria's heart pounded. She didn't know what to do. Should she say something? Should she look away? But before she could decide, Neymar knelt down in front of her. "Hello," he said softly, his voice warm and kind. "Are you okay?" Maria's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. She wasn't used to people noticing her anymore. Neymar glanced at her baby, then at Sophia, who clung to her mother's arm. His expression softened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, taking out a stack of bills. "Here," he said, handing them to Maria. Her hands trembled as she took them. It was more money than she had seen in months. Enough to buy food, find shelter, maybe even get a small room for a few nights. But Neymar wasn't done. He looked over his shoulder and spoke to one of his assistants. "Go inside. Get them food, warm clothes, and anything else they need." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't know how to thank you." Neymar smiled. "You don't have to." His assistant returned moments later, carrying bags filled with groceries, blankets, and even small toys for the children. Sophia gasped in delight, her eyes lighting up for the first time in weeks. She reached into one of the bags and pulled out a small stuffed bear, hugging it tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Neymar," she said, her voice full of pure joy. Neymar chuckled. "You're welcome, Princessa." Maria wiped at her face, unable to stop the tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. As Neymar stood up to leave, he placed a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. "Things will get better," he said. "Don't give up." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the store. Maria sat there, still in shock, holding on to the money, the food, and the kindness that had just been handed to her like a miracle. She looked down at her children, who were already munching on the fresh bread from the bag, and felt a sob rise in her throat. Today, she wouldn't have to worry about their next meal. Today, her children were safe, and it was all because of one man's kindness. Maria could barely process what had just happened. Her hands were still shaking as she held the food and money Neymar had given her. This wasn't just a small act of kindness. It was life-changing. For the first time in months, Maria didn't feel invisible. Someone had seen her. Someone had cared. She clutched her baby tighter as Sophia beamed, hugging her new stuffed bear like it was the most precious thing in the world. Maria exhaled deeply, blinking back tears. She knew she had to act quickly. This wasn't just a moment to cherish, it was a second chance. She gathered the bags and stood up. "Come on, Sophia," she said, her voice steadier than before. "Let's find a place to stay." They walked through the city streets, hope rising in Maria's chest for the first time in forever. She had enough money for a warm meal and a safe place to sleep tonight. She found a small, budget motel nearby and approached the front desk hesitantly. The receptionist barely glanced up at her, another person used to looking past those who had nothing. Maria swallowed her pride. "Do you have any rooms available?" she asked softly. The receptionist sighed, clearly impatient. "Cheapest one is $30 a night. You got that kind of money?" Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out the crisp bills Neymar had given her. The receptionist's expression changed immediately. "Oh, well, in that case, yes, we do." Minutes later, Maria and her children were stepping into a small but clean motel room. For the first time in months, they had a bed. They had walls to protect them from the cold. Maria collapsed onto the mattress, her baby curled up beside her, Sophia laying on her other side. Tears streamed down her face. Not tears of pain this time, tears of relief. She stroked her baby's hair and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. The next morning, Maria woke up feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Rested. The sun peeked through the thin motel curtains, casting a golden light across the small room. Sophia stirred beside her, yawning and stretching. Maria sat up, looking around. The room wasn't fancy, but it was the safest place they had slept in months. Then, she remembered, she still had money left. Enough for breakfast, maybe even enough to look for work. She got up and gently shook Sophia awake. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go get something to eat." Sophia's eyes lit up. "Real food." Maria smiled. "Yes, real food." They made their way to a small cafe nearby. As they sat down, Maria let herself enjoy the simple pleasure of ordering food without worrying about whether she could afford it. When the food arrived, Sophia giggled with excitement before digging in. Maria took a bite of her own meal, closing her eyes as the flavors filled her mouth. She had forgotten what it felt like to eat without rationing every bite. She glanced down at her baby, who was happily drinking warm milk. It wasn't much, but right now it was everything. A new opportunity. As they finished their meal, Maria noticed a sign on the cafe door. "Now hiring, kitchen help wanted." Her heart skipped a beat. Cooking had always been her passion. Before everything fell apart, she had worked in a bakery, waking up before dawn to prepare fresh bread and pastries. Could this be her chance? She hesitated for a moment, then stood up and approached the counter. "Excuse me," she said, "are you still hiring?" The cafe manager, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, studied Maria for a moment. She glanced at her worn-out clothes and the tiredness in her eyes. Maria braced herself for another rejection, but instead the woman smiled. "Do you have experience?" "Yes," Maria said quickly. "I used to work in a bakery." The woman nodded. "Come to the back. Let's see what you can do." Maria's hands trembled as she stepped into the small kitchen. The scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air, reminding her of a time when her life had been normal. The manager handed her an apron. "Make me something," she said, gesturing to the ingredients on the counter. Maria took a deep breath. She could do this. She had to do this. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Her hands, though stiff from weeks of sleeping on the streets, still remembered. She kneaded dough, shaped it carefully, and placed it in the oven. As it baked, she prepared a small plate of fruit and cream to go along with it. When the timer rang, she pulled out a golden, perfectly baked pastry. She plated it carefully and handed it to the manager. The woman took a bite. Her eyes widened. "This is incredible." Maria held her breath. The woman set the plate down and smiled. "You're hired." Maria felt tears well up in her eyes. She had a job. She had a way forward. Call from Neymar. That evening, after her first shift, Maria returned to the motel, exhausted but happy. She had earned her first honest paycheck in months. As she sat on the bed, rocking her baby to sleep, her phone rang. She frowned. No one ever called her. She picked it up hesitantly. "Hello!" A familiar voice came through the line. "Maria!" Her heart stopped. It was Neymar. She nearly dropped the phone. "Mr. Neymar? I don't know what to say." Neymar chuckled. "Alejandro, one of my team members, told me you found a job today." Maria felt her throat tighten. "Yes," she whispered. "Thanks to you." "No," Neymar said. "Thanks to you. I just gave you a little help. You did the rest." Maria wiped away tears, her voice shaking. "I wish I could repay you." "You don't have to," Neymar said. "Just promise me one thing. Anything. When you're back on your feet, help someone else. Pass it on." Maria swallowed hard. "I promise." Neymar's voice was warm. "Good. And Maria?" "Yes. I'm proud of you." Maria let out a small sob, pressing a hand to her chest. "Thank you for everything." As the call ended, Maria sat there, clutching the phone, her heart full. Neymar had saved her once, but now she was saving herself. Maria's life had changed overnight. She had gone from sleeping on the streets to working in a real kitchen, earning enough to keep her children safe. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise, got Sophia ready for school, thanks to Neymar's foundation, which had helped enroll her, and dropped off her baby at a local daycare run by volunteers. Then, she headed straight to work, rolling up her sleeves and putting her heart into everything she baked. The cafe owner, Mrs. Delgado, had taken a liking to Maria almost instantly. "You have real talent," she told her one afternoon. "Have you ever thought about opening your own bakery?" Maria laughed softly. "That was my dream once. But dreams don't come easy." Mrs. Delgado smiled. "They do if you fight for them." Those words stayed with Maria. Could she really dream again? A special visit. One afternoon, as Maria was kneading dough in the kitchen, the cafe doorbell rang. She heard a collective gasp from the customers. Then, someone called out, "It's Neymar!" Maria's hands froze. She wiped them on her apron and hurried to the front, her heart racing. And there he was, Neymar, standing in the middle of the cafe, smiling at her. Maria couldn't breathe. What are you doing here?" Neymar chuckled. "I had to see it with my own eyes." The entire cafe had fallen completely silent, all eyes on them. Maria felt tears well up. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," Neymar said. "By never giving up." Mrs. Delgado stepped forward. "Since you're here, Mr. Neymar, would you like to try something?" Neymar grinned. "Only if Maria makes it." Maria laughed nervously and rushed back into the kitchen. She wanted to make something special, something that represented her journey. She carefully prepared a pastry filled with warmth and tradition, just like her mother used to make. When she placed the dish in front of Neymar, she whispered, "This recipe kept my family going when we had nothing. I want to share it with you." Neymar took a bite, his face lighting up. "This," he said, "is incredible." Maria let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The cafe erupted in applause. A bigger dream. After finishing his meal, Neymar leaned forward. "Maria, have you ever thought about running your own place?" Maria's heart skipped a beat. I wouldn't even know where to start." Neymar smirked. "Good thing you have a friend who does." She blinked. "What do you mean?" Neymar reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. Maria stared at it, confused. "There's a small bakery across town," Neymar said. "I bought it a few months ago. It needs someone with talent and heart to run it." Maria covered her mouth with her hands. You You want me to run a bakery? Not just run it, Neymar said. Own it. Maria collapsed into a chair, sobbing. She had once begged for food in the streets. Now she was being offered a bakery of her own. Mrs. Delgado smiled. I told you. Dreams come true when you fight for them. Maria looked up at Neymar, her voice shaking. Why? Why would you do this for me? Neymar's eyes were gentle. Because someone once gave me a chance, too. And now it's your turn. Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. I won't let you down, she whispered. Neymar grinned. I know you won't. Maria stood in front of the small bakery, staring at the sign above the door. Panaderia Esperanza, Bakery of Hope. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door for the first time. The space was modest, but it had everything she needed. A kitchen, a counter, and a warm atmosphere that felt like home. Neymar had given her everything. A fully equipped bakery, funds for supplies, and a business mentor to guide her through the process. She wiped a tear from her cheek. This was real. She had gone from begging for food to owning a bakery. And now it was time to share that blessing. The first day, the morning of the grand opening, was chaos, but the good kind. Maria had spent the entire night baking, filling the glass display cases with fresh bread, pastries, and cakes. The scent of cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh dough filled the air. A small crowd had already gathered outside, curious about the new bakery. And at exactly 8 a.m., Maria opened the doors. People poured in, ordering warm pastries, coffee, and fresh bread. But Maria had one rule: for every customer who paid, she would give one free meal to someone in need. She knew what it felt like to be hungry. She would never turn anyone away. As she handed out food to a homeless man, a woman whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Maria smiled. "Because someone once did it for me, an unexpected visitor." Later that afternoon, the doorbell jingled, and Maria looked up. A familiar face stepped inside. Neymar, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans. He smiled as he took in the bakery. "Not bad," he said. Maria laughed, wiping flour from her hands. "Not bad? This is all because of you." Neymar shook his head. "No, Maria, this is because of you." He walked up to the counter. "So, what's the best thing on the menu?" Maria grinned. "You tell me." She disappeared into the kitchen, returning with the pastry that had once kept her family alive. Neymar took a bite. His eyes lit up. "This," he said, "is perfection, a new beginning." As Neymar finished his meal, Maria handed him a small loaf of bread. "For you," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You're giving me free bread?" Maria smirked. "Let's just say I'm paying it forward." Neymar chuckled. "I like that." He stood up, clapping her on the shoulder. "I have a feeling this place is going to be something special." Maria looked around at her bakery, her customers, her family, and for the first time in years, she felt peace. "I think so, too." A full circle moment. A few weeks later, as Maria was cleaning up after a busy day, she noticed a woman standing outside with a small child. The woman looked nervous, hesitant to enter. Maria knew that look. She had been that woman once. She walked over, opening the door. "Come in," she said softly. "You're safe here." The woman's eyes filled with tears as she stepped inside. And at that moment, Maria realized something. Her story had come full circle. She had once been the one receiving kindness. Now she was the one giving it. And it all started with one act of generosity from Neymar, a legacy of hope. Months passed and Panaderia Esperanza became more than just a bakery. It became a community hub. People came not just for food, but for comfort, warmth, and second chances. Maria's journey inspired others, and the kindness Neymar had shown her kept multiplying. Because kindness never ends, it only grows. And Maria would make sure of that. Final message. Late one evening, as Maria closed the shop, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Neymar. "Saw the news about your bakery. You've made me proud, Maria." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "I learned from the best." She put her phone down, looking up at the bakery sign. This was just the beginning, because when you pass kindness forward, it never stops. And neither would she. Maria never imagined her life would turn out this way. What had started as a small bakery with a mission of kindness had grown into something far bigger than she could have dreamed. 1 year after Panaderia Esperanza opened, Maria stood in front of her second bakery. This time, in a different neighborhood, one with even more families in need. The bakery had been funded by donations, with Neymar contributing a generous amount to help her expand her mission. As Maria unlocked the doors to her second location, she couldn't help but tear up. This wasn't just about bread. This was about hope. And Neymar's act of kindness had created a ripple effect that continued to grow. A special visit. A few weeks after the second bakery opened, Maria received a phone call. It was Neymar. "Maria, I'm in town. Mind if I stop by?" Maria's heart pounded. "Of course. You're always welcome here." An hour later, Neymar walked into the bakery, dressed casually in a simple t-shirt and cap, trying to go unnoticed. But it was impossible. Everyone recognized him. As the customers started whispering excitedly, Maria ran over and hugged him tightly. "Welcome back," she said with a huge smile. Neymar grinned. "It's good to be back. I had to see how things were going." Maria led him to the kitchen, where her team of bakers and volunteers were hard at work. Neymar looked around, nodding in approval. "You did it, Maria. You really did it." Maria smiled, tears threatening to spill over. "We did it, giving back in a big way." As Neymar watched Maria serve customers, he suddenly turned to her with an idea. "How many families do you help here per week?" he asked. Maria thought for a moment. "At least 200, sometimes more." Neymar crossed his arms. "What if we doubled that?" Maria blinked. "Doubled? How?" Neymar smiled. "I want to sponsor more locations, more bakeries, more hope." Maria gasped. He was serious. More bakeries meant more jobs, more food for families in need, more people finding a fresh start just like she had. Maria wiped her eyes, overwhelmed. "You're changing the world." Neymar chuckled. "I think you are. From homeless to business owner." A few months later, Maria stood in front of her third bakery, this time in a city she had never been to before. The sign above the door still read Panaderia Esperanza, but this wasn't just her bakery anymore. This was a movement, and Maria was no longer just a woman who had once been homeless. She was a businesswoman, a leader, a symbol of hope, a new generation of kindness. One evening, as Maria was locking up the bakery, she noticed a young mother standing outside, holding a small child. She looked tired, hungry, and lost. Maria knew that look. She had been her once. She walked over, offering the woman a warm smile. "Come inside," she said softly. "Let's get you something to eat." The woman's eyes filled with tears of relief as she stepped inside. And at that moment, Maria knew she had become Neymar to someone else. A message that meant everything. That night, after feeding the young mother and helping her find temporary housing, Maria received a text from Neymar. "I just saw the news about the third bakery. You're unstoppable, Maria. I'm so proud of you." Maria smiled, typing back with tears in her eyes. "You gave me a second chance. Now I'm passing it on. Thank you for believing in me." Neymar's response came almost instantly. "Kindness never ends. Keep going." And Maria knew she would, because one act of kindness had changed her life. And now she was changing the lives of others. Final words. A life transformed. Maria had once believed she was invisible. Now she was making an impact on the world. From being homeless to owning multiple bakeries, from begging for food to feeding thousands. Her journey had been one of pain, hope, and transformation. And it all started with one man's kindness. As Maria stood in the warm glow of her bakery, watching families eat, workers laugh, and children smile, she knew her purpose, and she would never stop paying it forward. Because kindness never ends.